Hello, everybody. Hi. Thank you for coming this morning. Welcome. I am Professor Melendez. Some of my students are here. Hi, everybody. So thank you again for coming. This is our speaking program entitled Living with Ice, Glaciers, and Climate Change. And Dr. M. Jackson is a featured speaker here for us in the Earth Science Department, and we are so excited to have her. She is a very accomplished geographer, glaciologist. She's a TED Fellow, a National Geographic Explorer, and she's here with us, which I think is super exciting, so I'm really excited to welcome her here. Just a couple housekeeping things. So we are still practicing COVID protocol on campus, which simply means that we're doing our best to keep our masks on and over our breathing orifices while we are here indoors. There are a couple other things to make you aware of. So the main speaking event is happening now from 11:15 to 12:30. And then there will be a 30-minute break. And Dr. Jackson will be hosting just an informal Q&A on the main quad. So if you have some questions that you want to ask or you want to continue some of the conversation that was stimulated by being here at this talk today, you're welcome to attend. I also have a request. I have created a survey to try to understand the impacts that this talk has had on some of your ideas about some of the central themes that we're going to talk about today. You might notice if you look around the room, on either side of the room here, there are QR codes. There's also a QR code on the door as you head out, and a QR code on the podium that you see right when you walk out the door. Those QR codes will take you right to that survey, and if you could complete that survey for me, that would be fantastic. So in just a moment, I'm going to turn it over here to Dr. Jackson. There will be some time for a Q&A after this talk, but please help me welcome her. And thank you, guys.
Thank you all for coming in person. It's nice to have an odd screen blocking me from you, but I wish I was an inch taller. I'm not, so we'll make this work, okay? Before I get started, though, I do want to just say not only thank you all for coming, but thank you to Christiane Melendez, because Christiane, I think, reached out to me maybe a year and a half, maybe 2 years ago, to get me to come here. I can't quite remember, but it has been a long road. It has been about 500 extreme shooting locations later and a pandemic, and I am finally here. And so I was thinking about that this morning when I was coming here, and I realized that Santa Monica College has an incredible asset, advocate, instructor in Christiane. And so if y'all haven't met her, hopefully many of you are in her class, but you haven't met her. She's right there, and you should go have a wee chat with her because she's fascinating, okay? But thank you so much for organizing this and putting this together. So as Christiane said, I'm a geographer, I'm a glaciologist, and I work with glaciers worldwide. This is kind of how I identify when I walk into a room. I'm also a writer. I'm a person who works with film and television. I'm a science host. I'm an explorer for the National Geographic Society. But today I want to start with an identity that's often not visible for women in science. So a big identity for me. I'm a woman. On the screen right now, this is my son, Finnegan. I'm a brand new mom. This is Finnegan. He's an infant. He's a handful. And personally, I think he's a genius. He can put his entire hand into his mouth, which obviously is a sign of just utter geniusness. You are welcome to ooh and ah, because I certainly have been oohing and ahhing for every day of his life, right? But I do think it bears asking, why are we starting here? Y'all have come here, you're expecting to talk on glaciers and climate change, and I'm showing you a picture of my amazing, adorable son, Finnegan. So why we're starting here? The thing is, I have been told for the majority of my adult life that my son was not possible. That due to this medical complication or this one or this one or this one, I would never have a son. We are all of us in this room, out in our lives, in California, in the world, we are all told so many things. We're told things over and over of what can be, what can't be, what's possible, what's impossible. We're told what the future will hold. And yet, here we all are, post-pandemic, in a room together once again. Here we all are, post many, many years of IVF and medical breakthroughs and heartbreak and the repeated words of so many medical and science professionals who told me my future was set and certain, and yet here we are, and I have a son. Right now you're looking at impossible, and just because you're all amazing, you get one more amazing photo of Finnegan, right? Okay, so as a glaciologist, my work, it pivots around possible. It pivots around data and science and prediction and variables, all this business of measuring and monitoring and assessing what is and is not possible. And what I have been coming up against year after year after year is that we're told things that sound so certain. Things like glaciers are melting, humanity is powerless to stop it. We're told things like, I'm never gonna have a child. We're told things like, women don't belong in science. We're told things like the future of ice is set on this planet. But I wanna give away the plot to my talk right now to you, okay? Our future is not set. The data does not support a world without ice. The data does not support a world without Finnegan, right? I want you, as I talk about glaciers for the next hour or so, I want you to consider uncertainty. Consider the impossible. The power we have to shape a future against prevailing narratives that are telling you what can and cannot be. I want you to think about the incredible data and science that we have at our fingertips. They're opening up a world of possible. And I'm going to give you all the examples. So several years ago, I was doing field work, about 10 months or so, on the south coast of Iceland. And one day, this stranger knocks on the door of my house, and he asks me, do I want to see something? No adjectives, no explanation, just, do I want to see something? I considered. At the time, it was rather late in the evening. It was winter. It was cold. But then again, it was Iceland, one of the safest places on the planet. So I agreed. I grabbed my jacket. I grabbed my gear. I hopped up into his super Jeep, those kind in Iceland where you have to take a little ladder to get to the top of the vehicle, right? And we drove out of the village, and we drove along this dark highway on the south coast of Iceland for an hour in complete silence until we got to a moss-covered pullout where we hopped out, handed me a bunch of gear, and we hiked up towards a local glacier called Breðamerkurjökull. Gotta love Icelandic here. We'll get a lot of it, okay? So we hiked up onto the ice for an hour, and we got to what I realized was our location, this place of flat ice that had a little bowl in it. And my host and I, we hiked down to the bottom of this bowl. And my host, he hands me a thermos of coffee, a foam mat, and he says, we're gonna wait. So that's what we do. We wait. We wait for 20 minutes, we wait for another 20 minutes, and then just about when I got to my point, where I had been sitting at night with a stranger on a glacier on the south coast of Iceland in the winter, just about when I was gonna pack it in, it happened. One moment it was dark, and the next moment it wasn't. The next moment, the aurora borealis, the northern lights, they started to blaze. These yellows, these purples, these greens, and this light, it pulsed through this rim of ice that was surrounding us in this bowl. This ice that we were sitting on, it picked up this light like a disco ball, like a chandelier. I never knew this was possible. I was literally sitting inside of a glacier kaleidoscope. I actually have no idea how long we sat there. I was just in awe. But eventually the clouds rolled in, and we hiked up off ice. And in the days and in the months and in the years since that happened, there's still a bit of me that's sitting over in the corner with my jaw on the floor because I never knew that that was possible, to see a glacier turn into a chandelier. It's these types of things that I think about as I work with glaciers around the world, what tends to guide my lens as a scientist, as a writer, as an explorer. Glaciers, they help us see our world in entirely new ways. They give us all these new insights into our past, into our present, and into our futures. They help us reimagine what might be possible. Today, we have some 5.8 million square miles of ice on this planet. Some 400,000 glaciers and glacierettes worldwide still on the planet today. And of that ice, we have immense diversity. Glaciers are defined in all sorts of ways by movement and morphology, temperature and shape. Just to give you an idea, I picked a couple of my favorites. We have these types of glaciers called ice sheets. These are glaciers that flow about 50,000 square kilometers unconstrained over a landscape. Today, ice sheets exist in only 2 places on the planet. Any guesses where they are? Look at the top of the screen. I'll always help you out with locations here. So we have Greenland as one. Any guesses on the other? Antarctica. Yeah, these are the only 2 places we've got ice sheets left, right? Another type of glacier, we have valley glaciers. These are our alpines, our outlet glaciers. These are huge flows of ice that tend to be bounded by the mountainous landscape they carve through. They sand down, they physically reshape our Earth's crust and carve out these really distinctive U-shaped valleys like the one you see on the screen right now. Here in California, all you have to do is take a wee wander up into the Sierras, go up into Yosemite. You might not see big ice systems, but you certainly are going to see the hallmarks of them. The landscape you're walking in was carved by ice. Another type of glacier, and you are welcome to ooh and ah. This is one of my favorites. This is a Piedmont glacier. Okay, this is the elephant glacier in Greenland. Piedmonts, they tend to be these types of glaciers that flow from constricted landscapes, big mountainous areas, and they flow out into a plain, right? And what happens is when they flow out and hit that flat area, they spread out in these gorgeous crescent shapes. I love them. If you've ever poured honey or caramel out onto a flat table, you are well on your way to making your own Piedmont glacier. Another type of glacier, this is a glacierette. These are smaller ice masses. They're typically formed through maybe avalanched snows or broken down parts of recessed glaciers. You're looking on the screen right now at a glacierette atop Kilimanjaro. Oh, we're gonna hold the light, Hope. Okay. Uh-oh. How we doing? Okay. It's actually hard to get scale on glacierettes. For those of you in the audience with eagle eyes, if you look down into the right corner of this image, you're going to see footprints, which might give you a scale, right? Here's the same glacierette, but scaled out a little bit so you can see it in full size. Glacierettes, we'll just hope. We'll roll with this. We can do this, okay? Glacierettes, they tend to be roughly 1/10 a square mile in size. Do we want to maybe turn that off and then on again?
Sorry, y'all. How's the connection?
Let's pull it out and see.
Give it just a second, y'all. Sorry about that.
If anyone is uncomfortable with the darkness, please feel free to get your smartphones out, turn on your lamps.
Turn the lights on just temporarily. Yes, technology. Let it restart and then do the trick.
Yeah. This happens. Don't worry.
Well, now you all can think about the glacierettes.
Think about that.
Wonder where I was going with them, right? It's called the dramatic pause. We put it in everywhere.
Sounds like a band.
It should be. It does give us a very helpful countdown right here, that it's only 100 seconds left as it restarts.
Is there a parallel that we can draw to our climate change
Oh,
narrative?
everything gets
100 seconds.
interrupted.
Hopefully this will restarts. Of course, and we're rolling so smoothly. I was told there might be some issues with the technology in the room, and they were supposed to have fixed it.
Sorry. That makes it stressful.
Yeah. What are you gonna do?
You get to wait for a slowly loading bar, is what you get to do at 50 seconds left.
Hey, well, that's not so bad.
Oh, we could do that.
50 seconds is
No.
not bad, right? Could be better.
I've spent entire field seasons in a tent, getting rained out watching a glacier. 40 seconds. We could do 30 seconds.
That's right, yeah. I think it's reasonably comfortable in here. Yeah. That's not so bad.
Is this a newer building?
This building?
Or is this a renovated
not.
one?
The old.
So this
Yes.
is part of the argument to do
Yes.
a bit of a either rebuild or renovation.
Yes. I don't know what this is about exactly, but
Yeah,
it's been
I
around. This
also
building's
don't
been
know.
around as long as I have at least.
Hopefully this goes good. Okay, I have a presentation going at HSS 165. I'm having some issues with the projector stability. Is there any trick to that? So it's we've got the projector connected to the laptop through VGA. It's working and it's flashing and basically goes off. It seems to be staying. Trying to troubleshoot that as well. It seems like it's working now. Just wondering if there's anything else you're aware of besides that, the main control system there and the cable. Yeah. Okay. All right. Well. Yes. All right. Well, I think we probably said all right.
Put those lights off and where was I? Thanks for being flexible. This is pretty much the story of my life anytime I'm in the field, so we can roll with this, right? Okay, so recap. You're looking at a glacierette right now on the screen. And what you want to think about for glacierettes is they're roughly about 1/10 of a square mile in size. So we have about 200,000 glacierettes on the planet right now. For anyone that has been Googling as I've talked to you to fact check me, which often happens, if you Google how many glaciers are left on this planet, you come up with 200,000. But I said earlier we have 400,000 glaciers on this planet. It's because I include in my global glacier count these. to 200,000 of these. Now, some of my colleagues do not include these small glacierettes in their global glacier counts. They tend to say they're not going to include them in the count because, well, these glaciers, they're too small. They're too insignificant. They don't vote. There was a metaphor in there. We can find it, right? But I tend to think that all glaciers, they should have a voice at the table. They should be included in conversations, trying to figure out different ways forward, right? Okay? So, I tend to say we have 400,000 glaciers and glacierettes on the planet. One last glacier if our projector holds. Do you guys all see the glacier in the blinking light? Christiane, do you want to call them one more time? Because I'm not sure this is healthy for people's eyes right now.
Sorry, everybody. Unexpected issues.
Okay, I'm the carry forth, but I apologize on this, you guys. Okay, so we have rock glaciers on this planet. Does everyone see the glacier? I'm going to outline it. Okay? Boy.
Okay, all right, thank you. Okay, so they're in the middle of the game.
Can we turn the lights on now?
Sorry, folks.
Pause.
Okay.
Just
Keep doing this, we'll probably just move to a different room. So we're just gonna move forward with this. Okay, so everyone should see this glacier rock outlined. So my colleague George Talent was actually up in this area of Chile, and he was talking to some local people who said they know exactly what a glacier looks like. It's white and blue. And so when they went up into these valleys, they said there were no glaciers up there, but there were springs. So we went up there, and he started looking around, and he started finding all of these glaciers. For those of you with eagle eyes, you can actually see that there are 3 glaciers in the image that you're looking at, right? So I want to show you what a rock glacier might look like from a different view. And I'm going to run 2 monitors, so sorry about this, but we're going to make this work. Okay, let's see about that. Ha, look at that. Okay, so this is another rock glacier that you're looking at. This is the Sourdough Rock Glacier in Alaska. Here's what's crazy. We don't fully understand rock glaciers. We don't even understand how many are on our planet. And this is a really big thing that you're looking at, right? My colleagues published an article in Nature in 2018 that suggested we might have as many as 73,000 of these types of glaciers out there. But they said there's likely much more because their data didn't include areas like, you know, the Russian Arctic, the Canadian Arctic, the Himalaya, all these places they hadn't actually counted. So what we know is that a rock glacier, it could be a regular glacier that has a lot of ice that maybe has fallen down on top and different materials, or it could be ice with rocks embedded in it showing past and present flow. But the big picture thing is, that's a real big thing on the screen right now, and we don't know much about it. Huge environmental phenomena. In today's day and age, we don't know much about it. That's what I love. There's so much more we have left to discover. There's so much diversity with our planet that we have yet to discover. I want you to hold on to that. All this we don't know about rock glaciers and glaciers themselves. Because I'm an explorer for the National Geographic Society. So of course, in some point in the talk, I'm gonna take you on a world tour. And I'm gonna show you all of these great glaciers, and I wanna see if I can surprise you. Where are all these glaciers on this planet, right? So hold in your mind right now where you think glacier ice is, and we're gonna do a quick tour. And I'm gonna try to keep up with myself with 2 monitors here. Okay, so who is surprised that we have glaciers in Alaska, and the continental United States. We even have glaciers here in California, right? Okay, where else do we have glaciers? We have glaciers in Canada, right? We have glaciers in Greenland. We have glaciers in Iceland. We have glaciers across Svalbard, Jan Mayen. We have glaciers in Scandinavia. You're looking at a tiny Alpen glacier hanging down just from the top of the screen. We have glaciers in Central Europe. If you've ever gone skiing in the Alps, you're probably skiing at least a wee bit on a local glacier. We have glaciers in Russia. We have glaciers in China. We have glaciers across northern and central Asia. What you're looking at right now on the screen is a gathering of Sherpas. These are people at the Everest Base Camp whose daily lived experience ties back to glaciers. We have glaciers in India. Right now you're looking at the Gangotri Glacier. That's the brown triangle in the middle of this image. This is the glacier at the headwaters to the Holy Ganges River. Glaciers aren't always white. They can often be brown. We have glaciers in Pakistan. You're looking at a glacier right now. Everything that's pretty much flat in this image is the lower Baltoro Glacier, which is covered with sediments. And this is a phenomenon we see all over the world, where glaciers get covered with sediments, and then the forest moves in. And we get a lot of different kinds of plant life that move and live and exist on glaciers. We have glaciers in Central Asia. We have glaciers in the Caucasus. This is actually a view, this image from the Armenian capital of Yerevan, looking across the international border into Turkey. Anyone know those mountains? This is Ararat, specifically Greater and Littler Ararat. Any stories come to mind? Well, there is this great story of Noah's Ark, right? And it crashed during the biblical flood somewhere in this area, and it hasn't been found yet, which tells me it obviously crashed in a glacier. And as the glacier is melting, we're going to get headlines coming out that tell us Noah's Ark has been found. That's called glacier humor. No one? All right, okay, we're going to keep going forward with this. Okay, we have glaciers in the Middle East. This is an image taken by my colleague Klaus Steinman of a glacier atop Mount Damavand in Iran. I love this image because if you look at the billboard in front, it's telling you there used to be a lot more snow and ice on this mountain than there is today. We have glaciers in Africa, and I'll repeat, yes, there are glaciers in Africa. We have glaciers in the tropics. We have glaciers across South America. We have glaciers in the southern Andes and in Patagonia. I promise I'm not trying to sell you Patagonia product, but next time you're wearing any Patagonia, I want you to take an eagle eye at the brand, okay? That's usually on the front chest of anything you're wearing Patagonia. Why? Because if you look in the background of this image, you're gonna see a certain mountain line that's very famous. This is Fitzroy. And so next time you look at someone wearing Patagonia, the first thing that should come to mind, glaciers. Yeah, we got this, okay? We can make this work. Okay, we have glaciers in Antarctica. This is what my field work looks like if anyone wants to come along. And we have glaciers on the sub-Antarctic islands of the South Shetlands and my personal favorite, South Georgia. I will own up to you, this is an entirely gratuitous picture that I wanted to add into this talk because I want to show you that sometimes being a glaciologist and working on the Haney Glacier in the background, you first have to navigate 100,000 breeding pairs of king penguins. Penguins poop on rocks, so the smell is extraordinary for a colony like this, right? Okay, recap. We have glaciers all over the planet. We have glaciers in the poles, in Americas, Europe, Asia, Africa. Glaciers are pretty much everywhere on our planet with the exception of Australia. But this should be the part that you don't know about. Everywhere these diverse glaciers are located, they are located within inhabited and historic environments. Put this in your brain. Where there are glaciers, there are people. And the two have been interacting with one another for the entirety of human history. But we actually don't know all that much about people and ice Because for a really long time, we never thought to look. We didn't think that people in ice connected in anything that was a meaningful way. And I'll own up that I myself didn't realize how important this connection was. I only realized how important it was when I had an experience out on a glacier that nearly killed me. And I had to have that moment to be able to understand this. So on the screen right now is a picture of Alaska. I used to live in Alaska in a small town called Skagway. I'm actually not from Alaska. My dad was a pipe welder, and so I moved all over the interior of Alaska, and my mother was a farmer. So we had a farm in Washington State. So I kind of bounced all over the Pacific Northwest. I actually never finished high school because for me, I didn't think education was important. I never met another scientist, let alone a lady scientist. And so my concern when I was young is how I was going to pay my bills. And so for me, I moved to this town, Skagway, Alaska, to work as a backcountry guide during the tourist summer seasons. That was a lot of money for someone like me at that age when I was a teenager. And you know what happened is I started guiding, and then I started guiding on these weird things, these big chunks of ice, because Skagway is located at the bottom of a fjord, a big glacially carved valley. You can see it in this inset here, right? And the surrounding coastal mountains, they are chocked full of glacier ice because for a long time, this area had the perfect conditions to be able to grow glacier ice. To grow a glacier, which we define as a moving body of land ice. Hold on a minute, this thing didn't go. Did it go now? Oh, now it went. There we go. You only need 3 things to grow a glacier. Any guesses what those 3 things are? Cold. I heard cold. Yep, that is the number 1 thing we need. Any guesses on the other 2?
Water.
Water in what form?
Snow.
I heard snow. Perfect. So we need cold and we need snow. What's the 3rd thing that we need to grow a glacier? Glaciology at its heart is very simple, which is why I'm in this field. Okay? So, any guesses?
Carbon?
Time. Who said time? Own that you got the right answer. Yes. Those are the only 3 things that you need to grow a glacier. It's really that simple. What we need is a lot of snow to fall down. We need cold temperatures to make that snow be able to stick around through winter, spring, summer, fall, the next year, the next year, the next decade. If you don't have all 3 of those things, you can't grow a glacier. We know it snows a ton in New York City, but no one has ever seen a headline that says glacier plowing through the city, right? What are we missing? Summer hot heat, right? We're missing the temperature and we're missing the time, right? You need all 3 of those things so that all of that snow can stack up and turn into dense glacier ice. Here's what that very technical, Christiane's gonna love this, science process looks like. Okay, all you really need is for a single snowflake, a stellar dendrite. Does anyone know how much a single snowflake weighs? If you answer this question in this group, you out yourself as a nerd. Okay? Well, I'm a nerd, I'll own it. So a single snowflake doesn't weigh all that much. It's about 0.01 to 0.02 grams. But imagine when you're a single snowflake, you're at the bottom of the pile, and then here comes 10 more snowflakes that stack on top of you, and then 100 more, and then 1,000 more, and then 1,000,000 more. What ends up happening is you are a snowflake, like my hands, with all this space in between, but all that pressure of your stacked up buddies on top of you, okay, you start to lose your dendrites, your fingers, and you start to break down, and you squish all that air out, and you slowly move down the line here till you're a bunch of fists stacked up together. That process, snowflake into glacier ice, it can take years, decades, depending on geography, right? And so for a long time, Skagway had the perfect conditions to have all this snow turn into glacier ice, and I moved there to go work. I actually worked as a backcountry guide, and I worked part of Skagway's search and rescue team. This is my search and rescue team on the screen right now. That's me in the middle, wearing all the puffy jackets. Because I had a really profound life experience where I got off the airport this morning and I drove here and I looked at all the palm trees and I realized I've done some terrible career choices. Because Everywhere I go as a glaciologist, it's cold, and I'm not a fan of the cold. And I should have studied palm trees, okay? I made a mistake. So one day I was out with my search and rescue team. Actually, I was out on this day, the day the photo was taken. And if you look in the far left, you can see our tents out on the glacier right there. And as our search and rescue team, together we were doing a training exercise. We were practicing what to do if somebody falls into a glacier. And we did that training all day, and at the end of the day, we decided, let's go have some fun. So we went over to an area of the glacier that had large seracs. Think big shark fins that stick up off the ice. We threw some lines up to do some climbing, right? And so what ended up happening is at the base of one of these seracs was this huge crevasse full of this clear blue water. And I stood right on up to the edge of that crevasse wearing all that heavy winter gear. And when the person who I was belaying, who was climbing up on that serac, when they slipped and fell, my anchor failed. So I was actually pulled up off my feet and deposited right into this crevasse. And I was wearing all that heavy gear. So me and that gear, we sank like a stone to the bottom of this crevasse. By a show of hands, how many people think I lived? Okay, there's some people, right? Let's give that away, right? Who was I out there on my glacier with? My search and rescue team. We had just practiced this. They were so excited. They had a live rescue. They got on it. We had just practiced this. And so quicker than a blink of an eye, they had me fished out. I don't remember because I instantly blacked out, but they pulled me right on out of that. They had me rewarming a sleeping bag. I lived to tell the story. But this isn't the reason, as much as I do love adventure stories, why I'm telling you this story. I'm telling you this story because of what happened after. When after, I went back down into Skagway, population 900, and everybody there wanted to know what was it like for me to get rescued by my own search and rescue team. And when I told them my glacier story, they told me their glacier story. They started to tell me stories like what you see on the screen, their daily lived interaction, taking the dog for a walk up to the local glacier. They started to tell me stories that showed people in ice interacting in all sorts of extraordinary and ordinary ways. Stories that showed glaciers meant something to people, just like our rivers and our parks and our oceans, that glaciers gave people a sense of identity, a sense of who they were and who they could be, about where they wanted to go on this planet. And for me, listening to all of these stories, I started to realize we had this significant knowledge disparity about glaciers, about how people in glaciers connect, and that everything I'd read to that point didn't actually match what was happening on the ground, especially today, when glaciers are widely narrated as one of the most visible manifestations of global climatic changes. Everyone in the room, you are likely familiar with this to some degree or not. Stories of climate change are full of image after image after image of glaciers materially retreating. Evidence that yes, climatic changes are happening, and yes, human beings are transforming Earth's systems. But what does that actually mean? We did a world tour a moment ago. I showed you there's glaciers all over this planet. They're all located and inhabited in historic environments. So what's happening with our ice worldwide, and how is what is happening to that ice impact everyone that lives with them, who used to live with them in the past, or might live with them in the future? How does all of this impact people living here in the States, who don't have glaciers in their backyard here in California? Or maybe what's happening with people who live in China or people who live in Alaska? What's going on? We know very little. There aren't easy, cut and dry answers to questions like this. But this is the science that I work in, and this is the stuff that I've built a career on, that I spend 6, 9, 12 months out in the field, in the Arctic, Antarctica, Africa, Europe, trying to understand what's happening to the ice, and then what's happening with the people who live with that ice. I'm gonna give you a super localized example. For years, I've been working in Iceland, which is the country on the screen right now. Glaciers are all over Iceland, but specifically, I've been working on the south coast, right? The island today has about 400 glaciers total, and 269 of these glaciers are named, with names going all the way back to settlement. Settlement's a time period here because Iceland has been settled for about the last 1,000 years, when Norse seafarers first showed up in Iceland in the year, 871 or so, okay? While I'm fascinated with most of the entire island, I focus a lot of work along the edge of the ice cap Vatnajökull, where these 30 glaciers basically cascade down one right after the other along this 125-mile narrow stretch of sparsely inhabited coastline, which is squeezed between the South Atlantic to the south, and the ice cap to the north. Here, people literally have glaciers in their backyard. And like glaciers worldwide, glaciers here in Iceland fluctuate in multitudes of complex ways to local, regional, and global environmental dynamics. Local glaciology models are saying that the glaciers on the screen, all of Iceland's glaciers, are going to lose about 25 to 35% of present volume over the next 50 years, largely as a result of increasing air temperatures. The stress for these glaciers in Iceland is increasing air temperatures, so they all have that same stress, but uniquely, each one of these glaciers reacts differently. Let me give you a couple examples. I'm going to show you a couple glaciers. That glacier I sat on at the beginning of this talk, the one I saw turn into a chandelier, that's this glacier on the screen, Breiðamergjökull. Between 1982 and 2020, there has been a change. This glacier is Iceland's third largest glacier. It actually has a terminus, that front edge, that stretches 8.5 miles wide. We actually have to have a drone up in the air to be able to even encompass a photograph that shows you this whole glacier. The glacier's length is 28 miles long. You gotta wonder what that's gonna do to LA region if you put this glacier sitting right on top of it, right? This thing is huge. And since the 80s, this glacier from 82 to 2020 has lost 3 miles of ice length. This glacier is right next to it, Hafnarfjall. Between roughly the same 1890 to 2010, this glacier has recessed 2.5 miles, right? Another glacier right next to it. This is Skálafellsjökull. You come for a talk on glaciers, you learn Icelandic as you go, right? We can do this. Between that same time set, 1890-2010, this glacier recessed 1.2 miles. Here's another one right next to it. This is the glacier. Anyone want to try? You guys are going to be great. You're not going to know where the bathroom is or where the library is in Iceland, but you will be able to identify properly the glaciers. This is Heinabergsjökull, right? Same time set, 1890 to 2010, this glacier assessed 0.2 miles. But look at the valley that this glacier carved out, the cradle that once held it. You can see how thick this glacier is. All of these glaciers I just showed you, they're all responding to the same stress of increasing air temperatures, but they've all recessed at different rates and different amounts. This glacier actually experiences something called downwasting, which is a scientific term for anorexia for the glacier. It's getting thinner and thinner and thinner, even if its terminus isn't going to go back, right? So this glacier and all the ones I just showed you, they respond differently to the same stress, just like all of you. We're all going to respond differently to the same stress of maybe like the projector blinking at us, right? Okay, glaciers do that too. And just like everyone has different responses, those responses are read differently in the local community. Let me show you. I'm jumping back to that glacier. Anyone want to give it a go again? You're so close. You're going to be all right. This is the glacier Breiðamergjökull, the one I saw turn into a chandelier, okay? As this glacier has recessed over the years, access has gotten tricky. I used to be able to step from land onto ice, and then it bloomed a large pond, and I had to take a Zodiac boat to get it. And then locals built a bridge. And if you look halfway down the image, you can see the bridge, right? I've been coming back to this glacier not only to monitor its unique recession patterns, but also to see how this glacier shows up in the local community. Here's something to think about. Where the bridge is, stare at it for a minute. Stare at that bridge, because I want you to get this in your brain. Where this bridge is was once, when Iceland was settled well over 1,000 years ago, rich, vegetated meadow and thick birch forest. The Norse settlers who came to where this bridge is, they looked around and they said, we hit jackpot. They immediately, all along the coast, started building. They raised farms, they raised families, they raised futures here for hundreds of years. This is the same spot from that bridge, but now turning around and looking the opposite direction, south. What I think about when I walk around this area is how green, how livable this whole area used to be until the planet's climate changed. It started to cool with the onset of the Little Ice Age. When the Little Ice Age started to happen, up valley from where this bridge is, the glacier Breiðamergjökull started to respond to the stress of cooling temperatures by growing. It started to move through the valley and head down towards all those farms, those families, those futures. Glaciers never move consistently, even though every Hollywood movie will show you that they do. Glaciers usually move 1 step forward, 2 steps back, 8 steps forward. It's really a jerky process. This glacier Breiðamergjökull, it started to move with the Little Ice Age forward, 1 step forward, 2 steps back, 5 steps forward. And it forced those families that were living in those homes, pretty similar to the farm you see dead center of this image. It forced those people living there every day to come outside, look up valley, and make a decision. Is today the day they go? Do they flee or do they stay? A decision that's actually rather similar to the decision that thousands and thousands of people make today as they stand on the edge of the Rio Grande, as they stand on the edge of the Mediterranean. They turn around, they look at different and changing environments, and they make a call. Do I go or do I stay? Here on the south coast of Iceland, that decision got made for them. This glacier grew bigger and bigger and bigger. It actually grew so big that it pushed down the land. It weighed down the island's crust. The coastline of the whole island was pushed down, and the North Atlantic Ocean came in and flooded it all. People could not live here anymore. But I'm telling you a story. So we can jump forward in time. We can actually jump forward to the end of the 1800s when the climate shifted again, the Little Ice Age was over, and the glacier Breiðamergjökull started to respond to the stress of a warming climate by getting smaller. It got smaller by taking 2 steps forward, 1 step back, 5 steps forward, 8 steps back. Icelanders in the area, they saw the ice getting smaller and smaller and smaller, and so they started to move back into the area. They started to moor their fishing boats in these once safe harbors that started to emerge as the ice released its hold from the land. They started to raise again their farms and their families and their futures, but this time, building only on high points, because every one of them knew the ice would come forward again. It always had before. We're in story time. We're going to jump forward again, another 100 years. And the ice, it has not behaved at all like it used to. Climatic changes have pushed this glacier into a backward march towards gone. It is deteriorating quicker than ice has ever melted before in human history. I've actually sat across countless kitchen tables in this area, drinking coffee so thick you can chew it. Icelandic coffee needs some improvement, okay? But I've been listening to people as they tell me that they fear glacier recession. They fear that the ice might disappear entirely down to the last snowflake. And they ask me, can Icelanders still be Icelandic in Iceland without ice? For the last 1,000 years, part of being Icelandic meant having a relationship with the landscape that included glaciers. So as the ice is melting, what happens to the historic identity, the present identity, the future identity? What happens to a people as the land changes? I've walked across farms here with local people who tell me that they are so grateful the ice is melting. This is the very best thing. The ice is getting smaller. It can no longer flood forward. It cannot destroy farms and families and futures anymore. And these people tell me the glaciers are melting, and this is the only form of safety they have ever had. That these people's perceptions of hazards stretches back hundreds of years to include family experiences of living with glaciers that oscillated back and forth, which forced people to oscillate back and forth. So when we talk about climate change and landscape change, we have to talk about how living with environmental hazards color how we think about climate change. I've also had people lay bank statements down on their dining room tables and tell me very bluntly that as glaciers melt, they melt money. Millions of tourists in pre- and post-COVID times are pouring into Iceland to see these glaciers, to get inside of a glacier, right? My colleagues call this last chance tourism. People are explicitly saying they are going to see the glaciers in Iceland before they melt. And my family and friends that are in Iceland, their bank accounts are filling up. They are building hotels, they're building restaurants, they're taking entire families to Tenerife. Because for the first time in their life, they have economic stability because these glaciers are melting. Something they never historically were able to get. I've also had so many fishermen tell me that they fear for this region because they know economic instability is coming here. Because as the glaciers are melting, the land is rising. Imagine you're holding a sponge in your hand, you press that sponge down, when your hand goes away, the sponge comes back up. In Iceland, the glaciers press the land down, the glaciers are going away, the land is rising back up, which means the very best fishing harbor on the entire south coast, the town of Hup that you're looking at on the screen, this whole land is rising up, meaning fishing boats, cruise ships, they can no longer come into this harbor, and fishermen tell me this can't go on much longer. They fear the economic instability for this whole region. For years, I'm walking across these landscapes with colleagues and friends and locals. And just like all of us are trying to make sense of our changing landscape, so too are all of these people who interact with glaciers. And that's one of the things I think about when I work with ice. That glaciers make visible things that might not be the most easy to understand, things that can appear abstract, like senses of identity, spiritual and cultural values, senses of economy, human history, time scales. Glaciers make visible the stories we're a part of. The stories we act on, the stories we don't. Breiðamerkurjökull, this glacier, it is one glacier out of the 400 in Iceland. It is one glacier out of the 400,000 on this planet. I told you the story of one glacier, but there are so many possibilities between people and ice and all of these different glaciers, and we're just now beginning to look for these stories. We're just now beginning to value them, understand them, find out how we connect. And I'll admit, most of you here, you don't have a glacier directly in your backyard. Glaciers don't shape your identity, probably don't shape your cultural value, your economy, but I promise you, you are connected to ice at least in one really, really big way. I'm gonna explain it, okay? Go with me for just 1 second. Imagine a bank. I'm told over and over again by my financial team that if I want to get money, I shouldn't spend the money, which means they tell me I have to put all my money in the bank. If I hold on to a pile of cash, I'm buying things. I'm buying skis, mountain bikes, cat food, and books, right? So they keep telling me put all my money in the bank. That means that money that's in the bank, it's not going to circulate around in our financial system, right? Glaciers, they're actually a lot like a bank for the planet, but instead of holding on to money, glaciers, they are holding onto water. All of you should recognize this slightly problematic but overly simplified schematic. Everybody see this? Y'all got this, I think, 4th or 5th grade. You're looking at the trusty water cycle, right? We all know we've got a finite amount of water on our planet, and deeply simplified, our water circulates in the hydro system, right? evaporates out of our oceans, our lakes, our streams, into our atmosphere where it interacts with temperature. Then maybe it condenses into clouds, comes back down as rain, snow, etc. You all should be nodding. You are all seen this somewhere before, right? This process repeats as the water circulates. However, glaciers shift our planetary water cycle. They take the water out of our hydro system, all those snowflakes, remember? And they process it into glacier ice and they put it in the planetary savings account for water. We know that when our planet is colder, it is drier because there is less water in the system. All of that is over there in huge glaciers being held in a savings account for glaciers. The opposite is true though. When the planet is warmer, it is wetter because more water gets added to the hydrological cycle, very little in the savings account, if you will. And today, the glacier bank gets wide open. It's raining money, if you will. And we all know what happens when suddenly there's a lot of money circulating around, right? Everyone gets a stimulus check, we all go spend it, the economy goes up, things get crazy. That's what happens here with our world's water cycle. More water means more stimulated hydrocycle, which means more stimulated weather, which means sea level rise and bigger weather events like rain, hurricanes, droughts, windstorms. Whatever weather you have wherever you live is stimulated by more fuel, by more water, okay? So I encourage you, next time it rains here, go outside, tilt your head back, and pay attention to that rain, because somewhere long ago it was snowing, and that snow fell down, and it turned into glacier ice, and it flowed through the glaciers and the communities and the ice itself, and now that glacier is melting. It is releasing its snowflakes back into the system, and that system is bringing you, those snowflakes turn to rain that are washing down on your face. And that is connecting you. It is connecting you to the glaciers all over this planet. It is reminding you of that connection that you have today to the landscape around you, to your forests, to your oceans, and yes, to your glaciers. That connection is so critical to understand. You cannot care about something you don't know about. And my work, it is everything to me that you know about that connection, because my work revolves around that simple idea that with knowing comes caring, and with caring comes hope, comes possibility, comes my son, comes a future, comes a world that does have ice. Contrary to what anyone might tell you, there is hope for a world with ice. We know glaciers require only 3 things: full temperatures, snowflakes, time. Science is increasingly showing us that our ice has the possibility to slow its melt, that our glaciers have the possibility to grow back. We have to get our temperatures down, and if we did, our glaciers can grow back. That's worth repeating. The ice can grow back. It's possible to live on a future with ice. But, and here's the sticky part of that, there always is, right? We all know that glacier response time is slow. If our glaciers grow back, they can't grow back probably in my lifetime. And there's a doubt that they would be able to grow back in my son Finnegan's lifetime. But if my son has a family and small children, there's a possibility they're going to live on a planet with balanced ice. I am never gonna see the results of the work I do, but that doesn't make the work I do any less critical. Because like probably everyone in this room, I am in this for the long haul. I'm in it for the long fight. And to me, that's critically important, because what I know is that glaciers influence us just as much as we influence glaciers. And that means what happens to the ice happens to us. So I'm actually going to stop us there. Thank you so much.
everybody. I know that activity hour is ending soon, but we have a little bit of time for questions. And of course, if you want to have a little bit more time and space and to talk about some of the things that came up for you during this talk, remember that we are having a secondary event on the SMC main quad from 1 to 2 p.m. I can get out some mics if we think we need it, but are there any questions? And I'll go ahead and turn on the lights too.
Yeah, go ahead.
Hi. Thank you so much for the talk. My question is regards to so we hear a lot about personal responsibility, especially in the context of corporations, and then you also hear about the corporate and governmental responsibility of climate change and how those two are who's responsible for things. How do you think that relates with glaciers, especially with personal or corporate responsibility? If that makes sense.
It does. So that's a really excellent question. There's a huge part of me that wishes I'd started studying palm trees or whales, right? Can you imagine the slogan, save the whales, save the palm trees? There's a thing, there's a picture, and then there's an actionable. You please plant more palm trees. We've got this, right? That beautiful narrative doesn't hold for ice. Because I can live a clean life the best I can, and my individual actions are not going to affect ice. I'd love to dress it up for you. You and I, we're not going to do this. To affect ice, it starts getting into scale. We start talking about planets, start talking about all of us cooperating and working together. So now we're to responsibility, okay? When we talk about how do we save the glaciers, how do we live on a planet with balanced ice, we talk about how we do that and what that responsibility looks like. Corporations are huge emitters. Why corporations are huge emitters is because a lot of us extract whatever they're selling, making, fuel, bringing products to my house, right? So corporations are supported by individuals, so individuals can make choices within that corporation, but we need corporations to not only do better, but to entirely change the way that they are, the system that they're in order for them to have an impact that allows for us to live on a planet. However, if you step outside of the glacier context, herd mentality means something, which is why we ask individuals to always try to do something within that. You can't do everything. You really can't. You will lose who you are if you suddenly take on every environmental, climate change, social justice issue out there. So what I would ask of you in the responsibility lens is to pick the thing. You all don't have to be glacier advocates. I spend a lot of my time doing that. You're welcome. The field is small. Come on in. But if your heart doesn't beat fast for ice like mine does, pick your thing. It could be your local park. It could be a palm tree. It could be that whale. And you need to fight like hell for it. Because that model of behavior will hopefully influence the people around you so that we get that herd mentality of everything having an advocate. That's where the personal responsibility comes in that I think is very important. And I would encourage you to push back every time a corporation says, we're fine, it's your fault. Push back against that. So act within the bubble that you can, because we need our systems to change so we do get to live on a planet with ice. Yeah.
By what percentage do we have to reduce our greenhouse gas emissions worldwide in order to achieve stability, ice stability worldwide?
So the question is where do we need to be parts per million? The amount of carbon in our atmosphere, right? One carbon ratio against all of everything else in our atmosphere. We often hear the term 350. That's a really common term. I think there's an organization that fights for it, all of this. I believe we are currently at 410. If anyone wants to correct me, we're around 410, okay? The hard talk on that one is that 350 does not necessarily support a planet with healthy ice. We're looking at needing to be not only our benchmark, but better. I need 350 because I want to live on that planet because that looks a lot better than the future we're moving into. If we want healthy, growing ice systems, which gets into a whole big thing. You want a glacier growing in your backyard coming down the Sierras? Where do you want to be? We're still looking at being lower than that. We're looking at being 320, 315. There's even some that say it has to be 300. I think that the nuances of that, I'm not necessarily going to go into that fight. But what I am going to say is where we are at and where we are projected to go is not where we need to be. Does that answer your question?
Yes, thank you.
Of course. Are there other questions? Yes.
You say that number, are you talking about altitude?
I'm not talking about altitude. I'm talking about a ratio. It's the amounts of carbon in our atmosphere. There are other things, greenhouse gases, right, that we're emitting, that we're putting in our atmosphere, right? So, in casual speak, we just say 350, right? And that's that ratio of how much is in there. I believe right now we have 410 parts per million.
Is that ppm? Yeah.
Yes, you're there. Sorry, I did not explain that as well as I could have.
No worries.
Yeah. Any other questions? Yes.
Well, I saw something about basically using sulfuric acid umbrellas to protect the poles.
Yes.
I don't know if you know much about that, but you can expand, if you do know about that, expanding on that a little bit would interest me.
Yeah. So you guys are all in a community college, right? This is a huge transfer to wherever else you might go. So I never had a chance to finish high school, and I got to have the career I have today because I got to go to a community college who said, don't worry about the high school thing, just take classes. And I got to move forward, and that gave me entry into a bachelor's, which gave me an entry into a master's, which gave me entry into a PhD, which gave me a postdoc, which gave me all the things I have, okay? How does that relate back to you? Anyone who sells you on a single solution to climate change is slaughtering the English language. There is no single solution to climate change. There are tons of solutions forward. And a lot of the solutions forward that we're looking at involve changing our behavior as human beings. It also involves changing the mess we have made as human beings. And the approaches to get there do involve technology. They also, just to be very clear, they also involve changing who and how we are. But the technology, whether we're talking about direct carbon capture, whether we're talking about different ways to recycle plastics through bacteria, that's coming from all of you. That's coming from our brain trust. And that's what I think about. Any career you pick is going to somehow intersect with increasing climatic changes. And all the different solutions that we've got forward are going to come and be needed from your brains. I get to work a lot with the National Science Foundation, the National Institutes of Health right now, and I am so excited because there's a million amazing ideas coming forward that are all collectively going to help. The example that you just gave, there's some crazy ones out there. We're talking about putting a big umbrella in space right now, okay? I say any idea. Let's get it on the table, see what we're gonna do. Okay, great question. Any others? Yeah.
Is there a way that we can join you on your adventures besides having a postdoc and all the fun things, or does it require being a SAR team member, or how can we, like, is there, I'm a film major, is there an equivalent to being a PA, production assistant, on your adventures?
Yeah. So I do a lot of field work in science, which really just involves me digging things, okay? And getting very dirty in cold places. We're back to I should have chosen palm trees. More and more, we're trying to tell the stories of climate change. We're trying to say, hey, this is what's happening. And so I actually do a great deal of work with a lot of film crews out in the field doing science communication. If you're studying film and television and that industry, I would also encourage you to grab a couple science classes. Because a lot of the filmmakers I work with, especially at the Geographic, some of the photographers, some of the filmmakers there, they are incredibly good at their craft. So how do they then hone up some of the science details? Because we need that. You have to have a really strong understanding of science today because everyone is going to be telling you what science is not. Google me later. Actually, just don't. But there's a lot of people who tell you that everything I just said is a lie. People will tell you I have lied to you because there are actually only 200,000 glaciers on the planet, because the count that is important to them doesn't include XNX. Okay? So if you take some science classes, it's going to give you some basic stepping blocks, some foundation to whatever else you're in, so that you are critically thinking through everyone who's telling you this is not right, this is not true. To the adventure part of this, qualify yourself for something that you're having fun with, because life is long. You don't want to be not having fun. So coming out into the field, I really marvel at how it's changed. Early on, when I was working as a backcountry guide, I was the only woman out there. And nowadays, it's changed quite a bit. And I am part of that change. Not only me being out in the field, but who gets hired and what ages get hired. You no longer have to be someone at the top of your career. I want interns. I want people early career who are learning in the field. And I am not alone. So there's a lot of places to go out, and a lot of places are looking for young people who are going to bring a lot of new technology out. So that was a bit of more of a ramble safari, but I hope it gave you something in there. Yeah. Any other questions?
You talked about the glacier that was covered in sediment in Chile.
Mm-hmm.
How does that correlate to permafrost? And does one affect the other? Are they sort of like the same thing, or?
I love that you would ask this question, because it shows you're thinking about how these systems are at play. Glaciers and permafrost are two different things. We're talking about ground that's frozen, right? Then we're talking about ice that's going over that ground. But then complicated. It's like a ground sandwich, right? Because then it gets ground on top of it, right? So there is this magic sweet spot that I don't know quite yet where it is. But sometimes you get a glacier that gets a lot of material stacked on top of it. And that material acts as a blanket. So it actually helps insulate that glacier. We see a couple in Denali National Park that are doing that right now, that we're studying. That glacier doesn't melt as quick because it's got that nice insulating layer. But that layer might, as the glacier moves, thin a bit. And then the utter reverse happens. That layer of dark material can heat up and exacerbate the melt underneath, right? And so we're always seeing that change back and forth. How that then interacts, the overall permafrost, glaciers, same thing's happening. They're melting quicker and quicker because our air is heating up, our land is heating up, everything's heating up, and at different rates. And specific to places where ice tends to be, our latitudes, the rate of change is increasing even more than what you experience here. Okay, great question. Any others?
In reference to calving,
Yep.
do you ever work with icebergs, or is it yes? Is it like important at that moment to start calving to go and do tests because it opens up a layer?
Yeah. So again, we go back to career choices. What was I thinking, right? Here's what I know I was not thinking. Some of my colleagues scuba dive underneath.
Like Jill.
They go to places that are calving. So if you imagine your finger, you clip off your fingernail, right? Still part of your finger, but now it's floating over here. Glaciers really big. They can lose the front end of themselves, turn into icebergs, and these float along. More and more, we're starting to pay attention on the eastern seaboard, these big areas that have lots of icebergs because they impact trade. They impact our ships. Everyone knows what happened to the Titanic, right? But we're finding that now they're calving off, the process of breaking off. They're calving off in such large size that they can impact villages. They can impact small coastal communities because they can run aground. They can cause local tsunamis. We see this in South Georgia. A lot of colonies of penguins were wiped out when a huge chunk of ice came, rolled and flipped. I don't do anything with icebergs because to me that just seems scary, and I don't want to die for science. And you have to constantly engage with this thing that is moving and rolling in the ocean. I have some colleagues that track them. I have some colleagues that are interested in the acoustics of them and in the ecosystems, because some of our icebergs can stick around for quite a while, and they transfer seeds, mosses, sometimes animals. Sometimes we get polar bears over in Iceland. Any guesses how they got there? They called an iceberg Uber from Greenland, zipped right on over, and they're super hungry and there's nothing but sheep in Iceland. So it's like a charcuterie plate. Anywho, I hope that answers your question. Yes, sir.
I have just another question.
Yeah.
I've read somewhere that there's a fear that within the glaciers there's a lot of ancient bacteria that as they melt they start to release and like they can affect the wildlife. I just wanted to know, is that a concern? Should we be concerned? Is that how much of that is true? You know, like.
So there's a television show called Fortitude. If anyone is familiar with it, I'm just going to boldly go ahead and give away the plot. I'm that person. Plug your ears if you don't want to hear this. There's this town in the Arctic. They start to have murders because murder rate is very high in the Arctic apparently. And what it ends up being is an animal came out from underneath the ice with a parasite, and that parasite got in contact with people, and then the only way it knows how to reproduce is to cause human beings to stab one another. And then they stab more people, right? But it comes from exactly what you're asking about. What's going to come out, what's going to melt out from our glaciers? A lot of my colleagues who work up in the Yukon Territory are running because small ice patches and glaciers are melting up there, and they're melting out the story of early humans, right? Who, as soon as a person who might have been stuck in the ice, mammoth, these types of things, when they get exposed to the air, that disintegrates away. We see that more in the context of permafrost, right? As the permafrost is thawing at different rates, it tends to squeeze things out like big mammoth tusks, right? It's really common up there now. There's a lot of talk about anthrax, smallpox, and other things. Those coming out, that tends to get like a really discrete scenario that then gets amplified in the media. It's not a concern for me when I'm working out there. That being said, one of my colleagues found moss that had been frozen for thousands of years up in the high Arctic. And they brought it to their lab. They gave it a better situation in the Petri dish. They brought in some IKEA lamps, some couches, gave it some good local craft, and that moss grew again. We don't know everything that's melting out of the ice. There's a lot to be unknown. In Iceland, I was with some friends and I tripped in some mud that was right in front of a glacier, and I hit something huge. And I was like, what is that? I thought it was a rock, but it sounded different. And we pulled a log out from our last ice age. It had been stuck in the mud. And so I'm holding a huge tree that's thousands of years old. I would never have expected that, right? Glaciology is about surprises. Things are melting out. Yeah. Any other questions? Yeah.
You mentioned that you're just deeply connected with ice, and that's why you fight for it, and for yourself and your kid and their kid, and but the response, the results are not very immediate for like climate scientists, not so much. So I'm just wondering, how do you not lose hope? Because, like, doesn't it get depressing that the results, that the work you do, the results is not immediate? How do you keep fighting, I guess, is my question.
That is a beautiful question and a really hard one. I have to have hope, because I look around and it's scary as hell right now, and I want to believe that the future that we're going to go into is the one that I can have hope with. If I believe something else, if I give in to the cynicism, that's an excuse for me to check out and step out. And that does not mean that every day I am 100% full bore on that. There are days when I just need to go for a kayak, I need to go for a run, and I need to turn it all off, or I dive into a Netflix show and recharge. Because I'm only as good out there as I am here. And so I do need to recharge. But I can't give in to the ulterior narratives that our future is set. I want to shape a future with ice, and so I'm out there and I'm going to fight for it, and I'm going to get out of bed each day. And sometimes I don't look pretty when I get out of bed, but I am still getting out of bed and I'm moving forward. That's the option to me. I don't have a magic answer for you on what that drive is, besides I've got it and I see it in most people. There are times when you don't have that drive. and that is okay, as long as it comes back. Any other questions? Okay, then we're gonna pause there. If anyone wants, we're gonna have a rally out on the lawn and have a wee chat. You're welcome to come. Otherwise, thank you so much.
Folks, if you don't mind completing that survey, there are a few QR codes around the room and then a couple on your way out, so that would be super helpful. Thanks everybody for coming.
Yes.
Yeah.
Great.
You okay?